you're a political reporter. You report for Semaphore. So when you're sitting out there, Trump comes out. He had chosen to come to this. Obviously, Vice President Harris did not come. He came. He wanted to be there. And then it started out as we just heard. What was your reaction? Were you surprised?
Yeah, I was shocked. I didn't anticipate that because I figured if the former president made the effort to come to Chicago in front of a bunch of journalists, black journalists, he would anticipate, certain questions. So I was excited to, do the interview and then immediately kind of sank in my seat once he started, like, essentially bashing the panel.
And happy Saturday and welcome to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. It is Saturday, August 3rd, and we're here again to talk about the latest stuff that's in the news. And I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to just tell you right now, Val Atkinson is also here, retired political science professor from North Carolina Central University, because I can't talk about any of this crazy stuff that goes on in the world without having Val here. Hey, Val, welcome back to The Deal.
Thank you, Ed. Good to be here.
Well, Val, in the opening montage, I'm pretty sure people saw a picture of Donald Trump sitting on a stage with the backdrop of NABJ at their annual convention. This time it was in Chicago. And there's a lot of controversy over whether or not he should have ever been speaking in the first place. We'll deal with that as we go along, whether or not it was right or wrong to invite him in the first place. But the clip that we showed immediately before coming on, it's clear that Donald Trump's an asshole. Now, he went right in on Rachel Scott and told her that her interview question was off base. Let's back up, though. The fact that he was at NABJ caused a lot of controversy. I have been a member in the past of NABJ. You have too. I haven't been active in years. I don't think you have either. So I can't tell you how the organization's been functioning recently. But let's deal with the first question. How the hell did Trump get on the stage in the first place? Was it a good idea? I don't think it was, but we can figure that out too. But how did he get on the stage? And then him being on stage and how he behaved, how did that go over for you?
Well, according to the Washington Post, give them credit for this, the chair of the National Association of Black Journalists was blindsided. She was not in favor of this because it had gotten started before she was aware. And when she became aware, she said, no, I don't think that's a good idea. We shouldn't do this. Trump uses the media to get his points across. He'll never answer a question, right down the line. She had him picked. Some administrative shenanigans went on, and he got invited anyway, because I think somebody saw that, this is going to be a feather in the cap for NABJ. And it did give them ink. It gave them some exposure that they might not have gotten had Trump not been there, but they paid a price for it. Joy Reid of MSNBC's The Readout said it succinctly, I thought. She said, NABJ, you have been had. And she was talking about what Donald Trump did to them because he used that time to get across his talking points, to insult the interviewer, to insult the NABJ. He never answered questions, but people that knew Donald Trump expected this in the beginning. It was only a few people at NABJ that thought that, this is going to be nice and we're going to get some ink for, having the presidential nomination of the Republican Party on our show, using our platform to move things forward. It was a disaster. Even for Donald Trump, it was a disaster because it showed him in his worst light. That is, he is not an issues person. He probably knows less than any other presidential candidate about the issues, but he has a lot of street smarts that you can ask him a issues-oriented question, and the next thing you know, he's talking about the ethnic identification of his opponent. And you wonder, how did we get here? Well, that's what he does all the time. He changes the subject. He insults people. He says some outrageous lie that everybody knows is a lie. And you forget, as the interviewer, the lie is so outrageous that you jump on that right away and say, wait a minute, that's not true. And you forget about the question you ask him about where was he when his wife was having their child? Who was he with? And he tells some crazy lie about the ethnicity of his opponent, and you forget about the question you ask. I mean, this guy could write a book, or somebody could write a book on how skillful Donald Trump is at playing the media. And he does it all the time, and they've always been behind. And NABJ is an arm of the media. They got played, as Joy Reid said. They just got played.
Yeah, one more aspect of that. Here's a clip of Roland Martin confronting the Trump person who was there on staff that actually, I guess had helped organize this, and then we'll finish up this subject.
Now, let me explain something to you. No, you can keep rolling on. I want you to understand something. You're talking to a life member. You're talking to a Hall of Famer. You're talking to a journalist of the year. So let me be real clear. At the outset, Donald Trump insulted Rachel Scott in our house. This is after Donald Trump insulted 3 Washington journalists. You can smirk if you want to, I'm stating fact. He insulted Jamel Hill, Yamiche Alcindor, who was sitting right here. He insulted April Ryan, 3 former journalists of the year. Did not come here and apologize for his conduct and how he insulted them. Donald Trump is called.
That's not what you're being asked about.
Excuse me. I'm talking.
What were you specifically saying?
We can talk to all we want.
Excuse me.
We can talk to all we want.
Actually, you don't, because I can have you removed.
Okay, bring it on.
So let's be real clear.
Have me removed.
You're not a member.
Have me
so
removed.
Let me be real clear.
I don't care if I'm a member or not.
Here's the other.
I don't care if I'm a member
You really don't
or
want to
not.
go there. So here's the whole deal.
I'm going there.
What did he lie about? First of all, he lied about, in terms of abortion in 9 months, that was a flat out lie. He lied about HBCU funding, because the reality is, for 3 consecutive years, Donald Trump submitted a budget cutting HBCU funding.
But that's not what you were talking about.
Excuse me.
We can talk all we want.
The program that he cited about HBCU funding, guaranteeing funding, his budget zeroed that program out. It was under Bush, was reauthorized under Obama. He zeroed it out. It was Congresswoman Alma Allens of North Carolina who put it back in.
How were you given that seat today?
I'm sorry. Let me say it to you.
Why were you in that seat?
Let me say it to you. Let me say it to you again.
But that's not what you were talking about when you interrupted the speech.
Let me say
you kept saying he lied.
Let me say it. Okay, and I'm telling you the
That's not what
lies.
you were talking about.
Let me say it
That's
to
not
you
what you said
again.
during the speech. I was listening to the speech.
Yes.
And I was listening
First of all,
to
it
you
wasn't a speech.
interrupt
Here's the deal.
the 3
Here's the deal.
panelists and the president.
Here's the deal.
So Val, he's talking there to one of the Trump surrogates that was there on Trump's staff, and saying, listen, your guy never did say anything of any use here. He should not have come, whatever. And I think that seems to be pretty clear. I think, and I try to take a journalist view on this. I fancy myself still as a journalist sometimes, right? I run off at the mouth most of the time. But you're supposed to have an open platform. I used to cover the North Carolina legislature, and I remember being in the Republican speaker's office all the time, sitting down talking with him. I knew all the people in leadership on both the right and left in the North Carolina legislature when I covered that, because I wanted the people to give me a story, right? I wanted to be able to have something to write, whatever, and you wanted to be fair and from both sides. But when you're dealing with a person like Donald Trump, it's almost nearly impossible to get anything real useful out of him. He is who he is. What could sitting down talking to him in that environment actually gain you, right? So that's number one. I guess the other aspect of it, though, is when he brought up the whole ethnic makeup of Kamala Harris and questioned whether or not she had called herself black or whatever prior to that. She went to Howard University, for God's sake. What the hell? I think that's problematic. Here's the knock on, Val. If people are watching the podcast this week, I got a haircut. And I was in the barbershop. And the day that this happened, a day after it happened, I was in the barbershop getting my hair cut, and there was a guy in there passing out these papers talking about Kamala Harris wasn't black. I'm in a black barbershop. And he had bought hook, line, and sinker this whole notion that Trump was saying. And so one of the barbers said, well, who are you going to vote for? He says, well, I ain't voting for Trump either. And he says, well, what's the point of bringing up whether or not Kamala is black or not? Because that shouldn't be the reason you vote for. You should be voting for her own policy. He says, well, because Trump said she was lying about her ethnicity. And he was like, well, why are you going to believe him over Kamala? And over the fact, because there's pictures of Kamala with her black family, her grandmother and grandfather, and the people back in Jamaica. So, Val, here's the other piece to this. There's just been this ongoing talk that for some reason black men are open to voting for Trump. And they're more prone to criticizing Kamala over stuff about her racial identity and who she's married to and so on and so forth, and whether or not she put black men in jail, right? Now, black men went to jail because some of them had committed crimes. I mean, Kamala didn't go just round up Negroes and put them in jail. So talk to me real quick and we'll finish up this subject, but the knock-on effect of this question of her ethnic, identity and stuff like that, and how now it's permeated into the barbershop where I'm getting my hair cut. And then, of course, when the guy leaves, I tried to educate the folks who were left in the barbershop about how stupid he sounded. What do you do about those kind of things like that? It's almost, all you have to do, you got to go to one person at a time and try to explain that this nut passing out these papers in the barbershop is in fact a nut.
That is one of the toughest questions that we're going to have to deal with, Ed, because you have an amalgamation of people who are not very well educated academically. They have a big deficit politically, and they don't know how to discern fact from fiction when somebody is trying to make a point. That's a terrible combination of things. And we find a lot of those people, unfortunately, in our community at barbershops where the rules of debate are different than some other places like your academic institutions. The rules of debate in a barbershop is who can talk the loudest, who can interrupt, who can ask questions. And they normally end up saying, well, if it ain't this, it must be, what else could it be? And if you can't figure out the answer to that, then they must be right. But anyway, going back to this guy trying to sell barbershop people on the idea that Trump was right about Kamala's ethnic background and that kind of thing. One of the things you mentioned about her going to Howard University, which was the birthplace of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, the first black sorority in the United States and the world, she joined that. She joined the AKA. It's an all-black sorority, okay? And, they have rules about who they let in and who they don't. The same thing with the other Divine Nine people who I'm a member of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity. We have rules. So that should have been enough right there to convince this person passing out the flyers that I better not be doing this because I may not know what I'm talking about. But Kamala Harris is black. She has decided that she is black. All of this stuff about Indian and not being black at sometimes and doing is a farce. It's a good conversation changer because that's what Trump does and his allies. They have things like this that they throw forward when they want to change the conversation from real issues like the Supreme Court and gerrymandering and voting and stuff like that. They don't want to talk about those kind of things. So that's all this is. And so it's a ruse, Ed. And I want to give you a gold star for putting up with that and listening to that while you're trying to get your hair cut.
Well, luckily I was in the chair. I wanted to kick him in the shins, but I decided to let that go. But I did take the time to talk to the other people that were in there after he left to remind them that, clearly he didn't know what he was talking about. I suspect that, because he didn't say anything about her being an AKA. He didn't say anything about her going to Howard. He didn't say anything that would clear up the whole notion that at some point she had just all of a sudden decided that she was black. Val, here's the other part to this, though. The campaign and whether or not it's taking off, because there's going to be those people, right, that are problematic, because they were problematic 4 years ago. I remember some interviews Vice President Harris had to do with black media just to try to dispel that. So she went on stuff like the Breakfast Club and Uncle Luke and all those places to talk to black men because, she had to go through that 4 years ago when she was running as vice president. Let's talk about her campaign, though. The polls now, if you believe polls, which I don't, for the most part, but the polls say that in a lot of these states, she's pulled even or gone ahead of what Joe Biden was doing in terms of performance. What have you seen in those polls, and do they make sense to you at this point?
Well, the only polls, and for all clarity, I have to admit that I used to teach a course at North Carolina Central University Political Science Department called Methods, and it was a statistical course in how to conduct surveys and questionnaires and do polls and what they mean. So I'm on a different page than most people about that. I have an understanding what it's all about and how they are conducted. There is a poll called a representative poll, which I think is the Mac Daddy of all polls. What a representative poll is that you take a representation of the population and you don't take substitutes for that. If 13.2% of the population is African American, then 13.2% of your subjects in your poll should be African American. And if half or 75% of African Americans have 1 year of college, that's what your poll should represent and reflect the people that you're supposedly polling and that sort of thing. That's what most of these polls don't do. I saw one conducted by the Heritage Foundation that couldn't find enough African Americans to interview. So they took the number that they did find and multiplied it by 4 or 5. All of the answers across the board. That is ridiculous. I would, if a student would have passed that into me when I was teaching, I would have given them an F. You're crazy. Media should not even allow that the results of that type polling to be discussed or talked about because it's misleading at best. It's just erroneous. So what people need to understand is that there are several different types of polls that can be taken. And when somebody calls you and says, would you participate in this survey that we're running? Ask them. You'll blow them off their charts because they don't think that we know about that kind of stuff. But ask them, is this a representative survey that you're doing? And if you ask them that, you will hear a lot of stuttering and stammering and not knowing and that kind of thing, because they are afraid of you, who you are, that you know that much about the system that you would ask that type question.
Yeah, the most definitely. You know what? I hear some music, so let's take a break, and when I come back, what I want to talk about is I want to finish up on whether or not the Harris campaign is doing a good job or not. But part of that is who's she going to have advising her? I heard that there's somebody that's going to attach to the campaign now that you're not very happy about, but we'll leave that. And then, so stay right there. We'll be right back after this message.
In this election, we each face a question. What kind of country do we want to live in? There are some people who think we should be a country of chaos, of fear, of hate. But us, we choose something different. We choose freedom.
Freedom, freedom, I can't move. Freedom, cut me loose. Yeah. Freedom, freedom, where are you? 'Cause I need freedom too.
The freedom not just to get by, but get ahead. The freedom to be safe from gun violence. The freedom to make decisions about your own body. We choose a future where no child lives in poverty, where we can all afford health care, where no one is above the law. We believe in the promise of America, and we're ready to fight for it. Because when we fight, we win. So join us. Go to KamalaHarris.com and let's get to work.
I'ma keep on running 'cause the winner don't quit on themselves.
And welcome back to our second segment of the deal. You know, a lot of times I'm always chuckling when I come back because we say some crazy stuff in between. And Val, before we left, I said that you may not be happy about some of the advice that Vice President Harris might get. But, and we're going to talk about some North Carolina politics too. I know this is a national show, but we're in North Carolina. And I think there's some crossover in some of your disappointment at some of the advice that some of these Democratic candidates are taking. So let's talk about the vice president first. I was listening to Morning Joe a week or so ago, and David Plouffe was on there. And if anybody knows David Plouffe, he's one of those, campaign people that supposedly got Barack Obama elected, right? And they were blowing smoke at him. He's the greatest of all time. Then James Carville is on there, and he's so great, and whatever, blah, blah, blah. And they're giving this advice to Kamala Harris. But it seems to me that Harris may have even attached to David Plouffe. You have advised candidates in the past. You've also done campaigns in the past. I'm going to ask you a question. Why do black candidates continue to use some of these Democratic operatives who I don't think create good campaigns for black candidates, to tell you the truth? What's your assessment of one, David Plouffe, and then overall, if you were advising the Harris campaign, how would you approach it differently than somebody like a David Plouffe?
Well, first of all, let me give you a little background on David. David rose in the Obama campaign strategy network by out-talking the other strategists that were there. Plouffe had what he has, a particular very confusing type of display of words that he uses. He jumps from subject to subject. And if you can't hold 4 or 5 opposing thoughts in your head at the same time and relate to them accordingly, then you could get easily confused by this young man and the way he talks. That's simply put it. That's what he does all the time. So he ends up being the last guy standing. And somebody standing in the corner, that somebody being Barack Obama, for an example, sees that the other people competing for his grace are wilting. And this is the only guy standing because they don't understand what he's saying. Nobody in the room understands what he's saying, so he must be right. That is not true. And I hope Kamala Harris does not find out the hard way that this guy throws out a lot of stuff to confuse people who are talking against him, and they end up going along with him. And he's not right. A lot of times he's not right about these things. David Plouffe does not have street smarts. David Plouffe does not understand the tactics of a guy like Donald Trump. I think if Barack Obama had been running against Donald Trump instead of John McCain, things may have been a little different. with David Plouffe advising him what to do and how to do it. This, you have to take in consideration who your opponent is when you choose your strategies. Some strategies are better for you with opponent A as opposed to opponent X. And I don't think that David Plouffe is a good person to have as a strategist when you're going up against a Donald Trump. A lot of people are not good at that, but particularly David Plouffe.
Yeah.
He closes out his ear when it comes to listening to opposing methodologies to deal with a guy like Donald Trump. Is his way or no way. And I don't think it's the right kind of thing to do. He really has his biggest problem in understanding Kamala's base, that is Black women and Black people in general, non-white people in general. I don't think he has what it takes and the wherewithal to understand what these people want to hear, what their needs are. And he may be advising her on some things as to how to get the votes of the little old widow lady in Iowa, and a lot of the turnout that he may need in a place like Atlanta to win Georgia, battleground states, or to win Philadelphia suburbs, or to win South Philly, those places where you got a lot of people of color. I don't think his advice is going to be very good. I'm not sure if this was a good call. I hope it was, but I'm not so sure.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that the Biden campaign, when he was running, was doing, and I thought he was doing a good job, is showing up where colored folks were, because he knew that Black folks were the ones that took him over the top in a place like Fulton County in Georgia, in a place like in Milwaukee, in Philadelphia, right? In Detroit. Those are the votes that got him over the top. And Kamala, she's been going to events. She was in Atlanta. She's been frequently here to North Carolina. She was in Fayetteville the other day. She's, constantly been here. I do have a fear, but I've never liked campaign operatives. Those people who got paid a lot of money to advise people that came in and helped Black candidates, but they generally helped them to lose because they always want you to tack to the middle, right? And so let's go to North Carolina for a second. There's an interesting race. You got a Black Republican who's the Trumpiest of Trumpies against Josh Stein, who has been a fairly successful attorney general and legislator, and seems to be up in the polls. There's a lot of negatives with Mark Robinson. Let's take a look at this clip that we're talking about. So, Val, Mark Robinson and his wife have a problem with their daycare. They were apparently not very good at running business. He's a firebrand, is what they like to call him, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But Josh Stein, the attorney general, seems to be, or whoever's advising him is telling him he only needs to go after Republican white women. A lot of his ads have been focused at those people. And also they have a very strong component to police, talking about how he's done, things with the police as opposed to trying to solidify his connection to Black folks who have helped him. And we've talked to Josh Stein before. He's been on programs that we've done before, right? Josh Stein. What's wrong? I don't like the campaign they're running. I'm just to be frank with you. I don't like it. So what do you think about his campaign? And I haven't seen campaigns across the country, but I have a feeling that these same kind of campaign operatives are telling people to run similar campaigns where they need to pretend like they're love the police.
Yeah, I'd like to see Josh's campaign kind of solidify itself on the side of the majority of the people that's going to be coming out and voting Democratic. North Carolina is a particular state. We have people that come out and vote for Republican judges, vote for Republican legislature, and then vote for a Democratic governor, and a mixture of Democrat and Republicans on the council of state. So you have to know what you're doing when you decide what your number one strategy is going to be, your number one calling card, as it were. What do you want people to think of you when they think of your campaign? What's the number one thing pops out in their mind? Is it going to be some police officer arresting somebody for possession of fentanyl or whatever? When you got a lot of people out there that spend a lot of time and energy supporting you, and they have issues with public services. They have issues with education, with child care. They have issues with being treated fairly by the police. They have all these issues, and you don't address any of those, and you address only the issue of that may attract some of the conservative people in the western part of the state because you think that's going to be the difference. I would not have suggested that approach to Josh Stein had I been on his staff. I would have been about the business of taking advantage of a very, very sorry, decaying opponent named Mark Robertson. This guy is really injuring himself. Take advantage of that. Don't give him another shovel if he's digging the hole, but know what he's doing, okay? And take advantage of that as far as your strength is concerned. Your strength is going to be getting Black people out to the poll, getting them to vote, to make sure they know who you are and know what you've done to help them and what your plan is to continue that help.
Yeah. Well, Mark Robinson has a whole bunch of problems in addition to his wife and their daycare issues, but also, he's been an ardent opponent of abortion, but then his wife got an abortion. There's a bunch of contradictions in Mark Robinson, and then he's just a hateful person. I'm just going to lay it out there. I don't see what anybody's appeal would be other than the fact that he's a MAGA. And so MAGA people are going to support him. So I think you have to run against him in a way that will negate those MAGA people, like I said, solidifying the Black turnout in North Carolina. The last piece to this is that Roy Cooper, we're going to keep it in North Carolina for a second, he was one of the top contenders for being a VP running mate for Vice President Harris. And one of the things that came up in the news was that perhaps that he was afraid that being out of the state campaigning, it may lead to Mark Robinson having to stand in as governor. And he said no, that wasn't it. It's just that he didn't think he was the right person for this. And then a lot of names keep popping up: Pete Buttigieg, and then different governors like Governor Shapiro from Pennsylvania. You see him right there, and then the governor from Illinois, Pritzker, and the governor from Wisconsin, the governor from Kentucky, Bashir, and you see the pictures of the folks up there. Val, we know the vice president can't necessarily win you a bunch of votes because J.D. Vance, the vice presidential running mate for Donald Trump, I don't even think Donald Trump likes the dude. So here's a question that somebody asked Trump about whether Vance was the right person for their ticket. So about Donald Trump didn't even answer that he believed that J.D. Vance was the right person. Apparently, Vice President Harris is interviewing people this weekend. She'll make a decision on Monday. She has enough votes to be the nominee, so the convention won't be a brokered convention or contentious like we had feared a month ago, right? Now you have to bring in the vice presidential person. You want that person not to be controversial either, but to add something to the ticket. How important is it going to be, whoever her selection is for VP, to contrast against J.D. Vance? Or does it even matter because Donald Trump doesn't even seem to believe in the guy?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't advise the Harris campaign to choose someone that could go against Mr. Vance. I wouldn't have that to be high on my list of priorities as to why I would choose someone. Because although we said last week when we talked, Ed, that Mr. Teal had a lot to do with getting Vance where he is. And in order to undo Vance, if you're talking about getting him off the ticket, you may have to go through Teal again. I don't know if that be true or not. But regardless of how small the possibility is, there's still the possibility that Trump could try to do something to get Vance off of the ticket. One of the things that I would think that would be high on the list of reasons for choosing a vice presidential person is who could help me in their particular state. We know that's the reason you mentioned Roy Cooper a few minutes ago. That is the reason that he was being considered in the first place, because North Carolina, battleground state, 16 electoral college votes. But there's another state to the north of North Carolina that has 19 electoral college votes, and of course that's the state of Pennsylvania. So I would take a look at that state as opposed to Nevada, even as a definite opposed to Michigan, that has all kinds of issues with that, and even as opposed to Wisconsin. And definitely not Kentucky. We got to be kidding ourselves with Kentucky. I don't care who you put in there. You're not going to win Kentucky in terms of the Electoral College. It's not going to happen. So it's nothing this person can do for you with that. I would say the two people in contention and consideration would be Shapiro from Pennsylvania, and Kelly would also be one because of his articulation. I like the way that he exudes fire. He could be someone that can help you out on the stump in terms of being a good motivator out there, while we can free up Harris to be in a different location at the same time. And this guy can stand on his own to do that. So that's his strength. But beyond those two, I can't name anybody, Ed, that could really come to mind that would be good or better for Harris than one of those two people. And I think it would be one of those two.
I think you're right. And for the longest time, I thought Cooper had a leg up for those reasons, but for whatever reason he pulled out, that's fine. I think either Kelly or Shapiro would work for the same reason, and in Shapiro's case, maybe for a better reason with those 3 additional electoral votes. I hear some music in my ear, so that means we need to take a break. When we come back, Val, I want to talk about Donald Trump and 10 million reasons why I would not want to consider voting for him and his continuing problems with Judge Chutkan. I also want to talk about some things that Joe Biden wants to do before he gets out of town. And one of those is negotiating hostage releases, but also making sure that the Supreme Court is held accountable. So stay right there. We'll be right back after this message. Cool. Roll it.
Even the mighty might not see it coming. It's prediabetes, and it captures 1 in 3 adults. But you can escape. Take the 1-minute prediabetes risk test to know where you stand and prevent or delay type 2 diabetes. Be your own hero on smartphones everywhere at doihaveprediabetes.org.
On the border, the choice is simple. Kamala Harris supports increasing the number of Border Patrol agents. Donald Trump blocked a bill to increase the number of Border Patrol agents. Kamala Harris supports investing in new technology to block fentanyl from entering the country. Donald Trump blocked funding for technology to block fentanyl from entering the country. Kamala Harris supports spending more money to stop human traffickers. Donald Trump blocked money to stop human traffickers. Kamala Harris prosecuted transnational gang members and got them sentenced to prison. Trump is trying to avoid being sentenced to prison. There's two choices in this election: the one who will fix our broken immigration system, and the one who's trying to stop her.
When it comes to making plans, you are the best. The same way you plan each detail for those moments, start planning to protect you and your loved ones from a natural disaster. Protecting your family is the best plan you can make.
Welcome back to our third and final segment of the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. That's Val Atkinson. It's Saturday, August the 3rd. We're so happy you decided to take some time to spend with us. We've been talking about a lot of stuff. NABJ, that fiasco, the polls of who's going to be on Kamala Harris's ticket with her as the running mate, politics here in North Carolina, because I think it's sort of a bellwether of what's going to happen in the country, so on and so forth. Val, I have to come back to Donald Trump, though, one more time before we leave. He was a bad president. The people who follow him are cultish. I think he's has fascist leanings. He's certainly racist. He's certainly not very bright and doesn't talk about the issues. You brought that up and how he was responding at NABJ. And Val, I think the only motivation for Trump is to be president is, one, to stay out of jail, because he still needs to see Judge Chutkan in D.C., and also to cover up all his other shenanigans. There is some concern that maybe he was on the take when he was president. Let's look at this clip and you tell me about it.
Campaign, a little before the campaign, and so we got along right away. I didn't actually ask for an endorsement, but I think if I would have asked, I might have gotten it.
From the start of his presidency, Donald Trump heaped praise on Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, a man who just a few years earlier led the country's military to overthrow the democratically elected president from power. During one G7 summit trip, he even referred to Sisi as his, quote, favorite dictator. And while Trump may not have asked for Sisi's endorsement during his 2016 presidential campaign, bombshell reporting from the Washington Post reveals new details about one of the most closely held and secretive federal investigations into something else Sisi may have provided Trump in the waning days of that cash-strapped campaign. $10 million, which would be in clear violation of federal law that bans any U.S. candidates from taking foreign funds.
Trump has a lot of friends in the Middle East. I know his son-in-law ended up with $2 billion. Is it possible that Donald Trump may have ended up with some money from some Egyptian people, maybe? Or, what do you know about that, Val?
I know one thing, that the last person that talks to Donald Trump with a big pocket full of money has a great chance of getting him to agree with them. Donald Trump can be bought. He doesn't have any problem saying yes to an idea that you may have, if you got enough zeros behind that one or two or whatever number is out there. But that particular story talks about a lot of circumstantial evidence. There's no hardcore proof yet. A lot of circumstantial evidence that there may have been some shenanigans going on between the leaders of Egypt and Donald Trump and his bank account, and $10 million a check that he wrote to his account and a lot of cash coming in. It's just too coincidental not to be some smoke and fire there someplace. But it is not beyond Donald Trump to take a bribe, to take money. If it's enough of it, he'll take a chance on disrepute, on going to jail, on whatever. He'll take that chance if it's enough zeros behind it. So I believe it warrants investigation. It was being investigated way back when it happened, and Mr. Barr, in all of his infinite wisdom, decided to stop that investigation when he became AG. And now we don't know where it is or what has been uncovered or turned over or whatever. That's something I would like to see the next AG look into and determine if we need to find out more about that. And let's see if that was in his normal act as a president, so he could have immunity from that. I don't know. Even before he became president, I guess that's what some members on the Supreme Court would say, that if this is something that you would have done once you became president, maybe you're immune from that. I don't know. But at any rate, I'd like to see the next AG put that back on the table. And let's see if there was any nexus to Donald Trump and the Egyptians and $10 million that got contributed to his campaign.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the Supreme Court, because one of the things that they did say is the president can do damn near anything as president. And so that brings us back to a federal court in D.C. where the special prosecutor has been having a hell of a time, because Judge Cannon down in Florida says, oh, there's no case here, and just throws it out, which I think she's going to get overturned on appeals by the 11th Circuit. Then you got Judge Chutkan, who now has to supposedly go through everything and determine what's on the table and what's not, what's presidential, right? So on and so forth. The knock-on of this, Val, is that Joe Biden is on the way out. He's a lame duck, right? But he did put his foot down and say he's going to deal with Supreme Court reform. Here's a clip and we'll talk about it.
And today I'm calling for 3 bold reforms to restore trust and accountability to the court and our democracy. As the press shouted to me as I got off Air Force One, the Republican Speaker of the House said, whatever he proposes is dead on arrival. Well, I think his thinking is dead on arrival. First, I'm calling for a constitutional amendment called No One is Above the Law Amendment. It holds, and I mean this sincerely, it holds that there's no immunity for crimes former president committed while in office. I share the second thing I'm asking for. We've had term limits for presidents of the United States for nearly 75 years after the Truman administration. And I believe we should have term limits for Supreme Court justices of the United States as well. Third, I'm calling for a binding code of conduct for the Supreme Court. Supreme Court's current ethics code is weak and, even more frightening, voluntary. Any code of Congress must be enforceable. Under the reform I propose, justice would be required to disclose gifts.
So, Val, the current president, Joe Biden, says he wants to deal with these things with the court. You know, there needs to be limits on terms. There needs to be an expansion of the court, so on and so forth. And then this also extends over into the Senate, where the leader of the Senate, Chuck Schumer, says, we'll go, there needs to be something called the No Kings Act, right? That we need to deal with this once and for all. We hadn't had a problem up until now. Even Richard Nixon, the scummiest person that had ever sat in the White House, knew that he was not a king, that he had to get skedaddle out of town when they came up to the White House and said, Mr. President, your behavior is beyond the pale. You're embarrassing. You got to go. He got on the helicopter and waved and went away. Donald Trump would not do that. And so people are trying to deal with this. And the only way to deal with it, Val, is to deal with the Supreme Court, it seems. So you tell me, what is the chance that Biden can actually make anything happen? And even if he can't, the mere fact that he's talking about it, he gave up his position, right? He essentially said, okay, you guys said I'm too old and I'm not the right person, so I'm going to walk into the sunset. Donald Trump is a criminal and won't walk away. So will the efforts of Joe Biden to reform the court end up being meaningful in the end?
Well, we've allowed them to go too far before we start fighting it. And they have put in place some stops that won't allow us to play by the rules and change anything that they have done. You and I have talked about this ad nauseum on this show and other places about what happened starting in 2010 with Citizens United, and then just rolled down the hill with Shelby v. Holder and many other court cases, and the death of affirmative action and Dobbs and the Supreme Court rulings on this, that, and the other. It just keeps going and going and going. And the biggest of it is the whole business of gerrymandering and super duper authority of state legislatures. When you allow a 6-3 Supreme Court to exist, you allow state legislatures to choose their own voters. It's difficult to come up with a strategy to do anything because they got you blocked at all exits. Whatever you come up with, you've got to end up at a state legislature or the U.S. Supreme Court. There's no way you can get around running into one of those two. And so I think the nasty word, you mentioned Joe Biden is in the sunset. You talk about his whole business of lame duck. Maybe this is a time that he needs to do something that Lincoln battled with there. And I got to use the word with the M word, martial law. That is the only thing that's left to get around what the Republicans have put in place. You're not going to vote it out.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to vote it out because they've already determined you could have 150% of turnout and you still can't win because they've already determined every vote you have goes to this one candidate right here. And he can't win for one time. And you're going to be outvoted. You keep saying we need more votes. More votes for what? All of them going toward him. We done gave you him. They've gotten to the point here that they don't even run candidates against certain people.
Right.
You can have that. We ain't going to even put nothing out there. So it's to a dire place, Ed, that some of the solutions to many of the problems that we've had, they've blocked it out with gerrymandering and a ultra right-wing Supreme Court. And until we do something about them, which Biden has thought about anyway, by talking about term limits on the Supreme Court. But that's not going to help anything. It's like a drop out in the ocean. It's not going to do anything. The whole thing needs to come down. And you need to talk about adding 4, 5, 6 positions to the Supreme Court, having term limits beginning right now. That means in January, some people come off. And in January, more people go on. And every 2 to 4 years thereafter, you got changes in the Supreme Court. 2, 4, 6 years, they make your decision about that. And get rid of gerrymandering. Have commissions set up that decide redistricting and how certain congressional and state districts are to be drawn. That's the only way to do this.
Yeah.
You can't do it incrementally around the margins. No way.
Well, that's crazy talk, Val, because that's the right thing to do, and we're so prone to doing the wrong thing. And you let the Republicans take the high ground on this, because if you go back and try to do anything to try to reverse the effects of gerrymandering, they already got the court locked up, right? So it's like a vicious cycle. You know, you can go back to court, but what you gonna do? So you can't do it over in the legislature because they're not going to let you change the legislature. You got to change the court. And I've been making that argument with people for a long time that, again, I thought that when the Democrats had a majority with Barack Obama in the House and Senate, and they also had the White House, they could have done something real with health care. They could have done something real with the courts, and they didn't. And I suspect, and I don't even suspect, I'm going to tell you the reason why, because people with money didn't want that to happen. And as much as I like Barack Obama, he still had people like that were running the David Plouffe, and he still had people like Geithner and Yellen and people like that, and Bernanke, Sumner around him that run Wall Street and those kind of places. And we talked about it our whole careers that we've been together talking about this stuff, that money rules. And so when they could have bailed out homeowners, they bailed out Wall Street instead and let the billionaires keep their money, but people lost their houses. So we could go on and on. Don't get me started. Here's the last piece of this though, Val, about Joe Biden and how he rides out into the sunset. Here's a video of a hostage release.
Some of the most high-profile U.S. prisoners in modern times back on U.S. soil.
So, Val, there's some people that were sitting in Russian jails, and the Republicans been complaining about it. Guess what? Joe Biden got them out. Now they're going to make a big deal out of it because they don't like the fact that they got out under Joe Biden's watch, and Vice President Harris is standing there on the tarmac with them, hugging these people. Donald Trump didn't have anything good to say when the week before he was saying Joe Biden's not doing anything to get these people out. And my understanding is that he was going through these negotiations at the same time he's trying to determine whether or not he's going to stay in the race. And the night he goes to make the announcement, he's close to having a deal. And part of the reason that now, and if you think about it, maybe he was delaying making his announcement, is that he needed to finish this up. So you got even more respect for Joe Biden at this point, is that he was under this tremendous pressure, but he was still working on getting these hostages released. Does this hostage release do anything good for VP Harris? It certainly does something good for me in terms of looking at Joe Biden's legacy, but does this help Vice President Harris at all?
Well, you mentioned hostages, and I know what you meant, because that's what we call them, hostages. They're real prisoners, but we call them hostages because they're just picked up off the street because they're Americans, right? And they're used to get freed up some Russians that are in jail that they need back to make more assassinations or whatever, and that kind of thing. But I think that this can help Harris's campaign because it's a positive note that runs across all demographics, all ethnicities, and everything. So when we talk about release or exchange of prisoners and that kind of thing, it ain't just about Brittany Griner anymore. It ain't just about some Russian that we hated to release because he's a horrible guy. It's about people that have been in custody in Russian gulags, for lack of a better word, for a long, long time and had sentences that run out decades from now. So this is a good thing. And Kamala Harris is in a position that she will accept credit for being a part of this prison exchange. So I think they need to beat the drums whenever they can to say, this is what we've done, and we're going to do more things like this. Give us some credit where credit is due, and march on down the line and defy the Trump campaign to talk about this, because he doesn't want to talk about things like this, because this is now issues. The only issue he wants to talk about is one that they created themselves, is the southern border. That's the only issue they want to talk about. And they don't have anything to talk about that, because there was a plan, a bipartisan plan on the table that could have done a lot of things. And Trump told his people, let's not sign that, because I want the solution to the border deal to happen when I'm in office, not them. So let's not sign it. So they didn't sign it, it didn't get done.
Well, everything they say about the border is bullshit. There was a spike in the number of people that came over at one point. I suspect that was because COVID had abated. People had been waiting a long time. And then there was a spike. The numbers have come back down. I've been in Arizona a couple times over the last few months. And nobody on the streets talking about it. You go to restaurants or whatever. I mean, I was right there near the border. Nobody was saying anything. The only people that kept showing up were these Congress people from Kentucky and Nebraska, whatever, who have no dog in the fight, or Ted Cruz, the idiot from senator from Texas, who try to make this an issue. Val, I fly a lot, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, and you look over the country and you look out the window, it ain't shit in most places. There's nothing. There's a wide open land that we've never, ever had people live on in America. There are places that are crowded because people like to be in urban areas, right? I mean, there's almost 20 million people in the LA area, between LA and San Diego. That's because they choose to live there. People could spread out if they wanted to. They don't. And so if there's pressure from immigrants, they're not taking black jobs. Let me just say that right now. They're not taking 107% of black jobs, as somebody famously said recently. I can't remember who he was, but he's an idiot. They're not taking black jobs, Val. There's one last story that I think is important, and I can't believe it's still going on. There's still prisoners at Guantanamo Bay that were involved in 9/11. That's been a long time, Val. 9/11 is starting to be a long time. But there's still people at Guantanamo. Some of them pled guilty, and we thought there was a plea deal. Here's a clip, and then we'll talk about it.
Well, the US government has revoked a plea deal agreed earlier this week with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the man accused of masterminding the September the 11th terror attacks in 2001. The deal angered some relatives of the 9/11 victims as well as Republican leaders. Here's our North America correspondent, Peter Bowes.
This is the latest complication in this already extremely long-running case. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the alleged architect of the September the 11th attacks, and his 2 alleged accomplices have been held at Guantanamo Bay since 2003 when they were detained. The case has been delayed year after year after year because of complicated pre-trial issues. But now we're here, just a couple of days ago, that there had seemingly been a plea deal, an arrangement whereby they would plead guilty with the death penalty being taken off the table. And that sparked widespread anger, outrage from survivors, from family members of victims, those who died on that day. Mike Johnson, the Republican Speaker of the House of Representatives, said it was a slap in the face for the families of the almost 3,000 people who died. Well, now Lloyd Austin, the US Defense Secretary, has stepped in to, in effect, reverse that decision of a plea deal, saying that he had removed from the case, the military official who oversaw the court at Guantanamo Bay and facilitated the agreement. In a statement, he said, in light of the significance of the decision to enter into pre-trial agreements with the accused, responsibility for such a decision should rest with him. And what?
So Val, the Republicans were howling, because there was a plea deal. So part of the plea deal was that there was going to be no death penalty because they would just accept the plea deal, get life in prison, whatever, blah, blah, blah. There you saw the Secretary Lloyd Austin, the colored man that, as Joe Biden so famously called him a few weeks ago, that he appointed to be the Secretary of Defense, saying that, no, there is no deal. Will this 9/11 thing ever be resolved? I suspect that all of them are just going to die at Guantanamo Bay anyway, whether there's a death penalty or not. But, Barack Obama tried to have trials through the Justice Department, and this could have been resolved a long time ago, but the Republicans complained. So is the 9/11 perpetrators ever going to have real justice, or are they just going to sit at Guantanamo forever?
They sit there until they take that last breath, Ed. I think you've hit the nail right on the head. We've milked this cow as much as we can. We've gotten all we want to get out of it. What we really wanted, we got it. We got Iraq. That's what we got out of 9/11. Although the perpetrators were from Saudi Arabia. We didn't want Saudi. We know the Russian Chinese wouldn't stand for it. So we take Iraq out of this. This was something Dick Cheney and Halliburton wanted, and they got it. And now we are being distracted by all kinds of stuff, talking about Lloyd Austin and the rejection of a plea deal for the architect of 9/11. We're talking about how many people are still there. What are the rules of engagement and the rules of war that are being violated, and all of this stuff surrounding something in the middle that's static and ain't changing. That is Halliburton, Dick Cheney, and Iraq. That's what all of this stuff is and was about. They won. I mean, Iraq had a lot of oil. Saddam Hussein really embarrassed us and pissed us off when he was hugging this little toe-headed boy, American, and treating him like, the Iraqis were the big adults, and this was a little boy that needed protection, and the great United States couldn't do a thing. They said, we're going to show this guy.
Yeah.
We are going to go and take his whole country, everything. So how are we going to do that? Well, we'll get Colin Powell. Everybody respects him. We'll get Colin Powell to tell a lie and to say there was weapons of mass destruction. How are you going to get Colin to do that? Well, we'll snooker him.
Yeah.
We'll make him think that he's telling the truth. Hey, we could go on and on about this, Ed. And the only thing that's going to become truth about this is when somebody writes a book long after you and I are gone, maybe 100 years from now, that really tells the full truth about this thing called 9/11.
Yeah.
Really come out, because it's a shame. It's a fiasco that's wrapped up in an enigma, that's wrapped up in a puzzle. It's just terrible.
Well, you said the truth on that, even though the rest of the stuff ain't true, because Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, and the whole fact that the Shias get blamed for a lot of stuff that the Sunnis do is very interesting to me, because the folks over in Iraq and Iran are Shia. They don't even like the Saudis. Syria, there's pretty secular government. Even Iraq was a secular government compared to the rest of the Middle East, but that wasn't good enough for the United States. We'll leave it at that. I do have one other question for you, though. You got anything we need to know for the upcoming week? Anything you want to tell us?
Well, no, nothing's coming big, except watch out to see if Vance is still the vice presidential nominee for the Republican Party 2 weeks from now. And let's see who Kamala Harris chooses for her VP. So I would say the words coming up for the next week or two are vice president on both sides. Both sides. It's vice president.
Those are two big words, vice president. Yeah, who's
Right.
going to be on both sides? You know,
That's
folks,
right.
we are so happy that you spent this time with us. Audience keeps growing. We had really good numbers last week. Remember to subscribe. Different podcast platforms: Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you get your fine podcasts. we were like Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe. Tell your friends and family about it. Subscribe to the RSS feed. If you go to the website, just click on the RSS feed. You can keep that, and then you never have to wonder when we're going to be on. You'll just have all the episodes. So there's plenty of different ways to get it. Val and I really do appreciate it. We talk about it all the time, and we do this out of our commitment to telling the truth more than anything else. It's not about money for us. It's about, getting the word out. And it's like me being in a barbershop. This is our barbershop. we can tell and say whatever we want to because we're not bought or paid for. We can say whatever we want. So in the meantime, go out and do something good for somebody today. That's all we ever ask you to do. And we'll see you next time.